Very good afternoon to all our guests and welcome to our webinar on this Thursday afternoon. I'm Dr. Mariam Sidat Khan, and we have a very exciting panel of experts lined up for you this afternoon. So today we're talking cancer. 2020 has been a powerful reminder that every single one of us are in this together. The choices we make, our actions, and we have come to learn that we have the power to protect the most vulnerable among us. The same holds true when it comes to cancer. With your support, we are keen advocates and work every day to make sure that every man, woman, and child know that their lives are important. And by working together, every one of our panelists have made remarkable contributions in their fields to ensure that cancer patients and cancer survivors get the best possible treatment. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Charlene Parasnath, who is the head of the clinical unit at the Nkosi Albert Luthuli Central Hospital in Durban. Welcome, Charlene, and thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this. So, you know, when this all started, for myself, I think personally, you know, we talk about our patients, but as a doctor and as a parent, you know, when we started seeing what was going on in Europe, I think myself, I took it upon myself. I'm no expert in infectious diseases, but I took it upon myself to inform my staff. So I read up, and we did a week before the lockdown, I actually had presented to the doctors in my department, about what we potentially would be facing. And it was a week later that the president announced the lockdown. I must say our hospital initially was caught on the back foot because there was a lot of planning that needed to be done. And so hospital management actually got us in and advised us to cut down on elective work and to reduce clinic numbers, try to redistribute staff. And, you know, in the state sector, you know, we are staff challenged in most units, and especially a discipline like clinical hematology, where we have very few. I mean, the entire province, both state and private, have about 12 clinical hematologists in total. So we are really, really under-resourced. So we as hematologists couldn't do much to help the hospital, because we, you know, each department had to contribute towards the COVID ward and COVID rosters, etc. But with that being said, we then started to take measures within our own unit, and leukemia patients, especially those with acute leukemia and those undergoing stem cell transplant, are rendered neutropenic. So we are accustomed to dealing with patients that are at risk for infection, and hence our practices within our unit is that we follow strict infection control measures. But the unknown of what this could do to our patients was, I think, our biggest fear. And immediately we shut down the unit to any sort of visitors. We had to explain to our patients we have a 5-bedded transplant unit and 13 beds for leukemia, aplastic anemia, and other conditions that we manage within our unit. And so these patients usually are in for about a month at a time, and we had to advise them that they were not going to have any visitors. And so for patients themselves, it was a huge adjustment not to be able to get any sort of contact outside. And so that was the first measure that we took. The staff had to change the way we stopped wearing our civilian clothes to work, and you know, ourselves were fearful as to what we were going to take home to our families obviously the schools were closed. Some of us are parents, and we just were, obviously there was a lot of anxiety around this. And I think one of our bigger challenges was the initial, I'm sure a lot of people would have actually experienced from to understand. No one could really, because we weren't any infections, to understand what this really meant. And it took a lot of time for the staff to come on board with regards to masks, heels, and so for us, we were fearful because, you know, we were worried about people coming. I guess we all adjusted to this, and unfortunately, I think the people that had it hardest were our patients. So since March up until last month, we hadn't actually transplanted anyone. So as last year we had done 14 transplants. We had 2 at the beginning of the year, and then we had to halt the program. So some of the patients actually, a few of them have relapsed in that time. Some, 1 or 2 of them, their families are reluctant for them to be transplanted now because they are afraid of them picking up COVID in the hospital. So that's where we stood with our transplant program. We just started off our first transplant since lockdown this week, and we've got another one next week. And so I think the other challenge now that we face, that we've noticed now in the last few weeks, is that so as I'd mentioned to you, we have very few clinical hematologists. We have a colleague in Pietermaritzburg that is based in Gray's Hospital, and she's suddenly become inundated with patients that are presenting with very, very advanced disease. They're really sick. They've been sitting at home, afraid to present to the hospital, I guess, or clinics for treatment because of the fear of COVID. So we've got them really sick. And the challenge is that this is happening not only in Pietermaritzburg, it's happening here in Durban. And we also have gotten calls from in the Ingwelezan area where patients are actually waiting for beds within our unit. And I have mentioned that we have very few beds for acute leukemia. So these patients are on waiting lists. I don't know how many of them actually will get in on time to start treatment, and how much, you know, how much further the disease would have advanced. Another thing we've noticed in this week, just in the past 5 days, within the cardiothoracic department in our hospital, we've got 3 patients that have massive chest masses and been sitting at home for like 6 months. And these patients really, it's going to take a lot of work to get them, you know, get them treated. So these are our concerns with these patients. And aside from that, with regards to, we're talking about infections within our ward. I think the fortunate thing, the measures that we've put into place when we first heard of what COVID could potentially do to our patients with suppressed immune systems, we actually did something which was not being routinely done in the hospital, and that we were swabbing every new admission into our ward. And I think it paid dividend in that we fortunately did not have any outbreaks in the ward where one patient infected another, or a staff member infected a patient, or vice versa. We did acquire 2 very sick patients, unfortunately, in this period with acute leukemia. One unfortunately passed on. We obviously could not induce the patient with high doses of chemotherapy. So the one patient passed on. The second patient we had was in the past week with a condition called acute promyelocytic leukemia. And fortunately, with this sort of leukemia, there is an oral medication which is given in conjunction with a high dose of chemotherapy that we normally give for induction therapy. And the girl, fortunately, is still alive, but we are unfortunately unable to bring her into our unit, and we transferred her back to her base hospital on this oral chemotherapy. And we're just going to see at the end of 28 days whether she goes into any sort of remission and clears the COVID. So those are some of the experiences we've had. None of our patients on high-dose chemotherapy, fortunately, developed COVID infection. And the 1 or 2 patients that did come in for their routine chemotherapy, we picked up on routine swabbing that they were positive. They were fortunately asymptomatic, and we did not give them chemotherapy, rather deferring it. And fortunately, they were in a remission, so they did not relapse. We managed to get one lady back now after 2 months. She's cleared the COVID, and she's getting her treatment. Yeah, so that was with regards to the patients. We fortunately had no major problems with regards to infections in the ward. With regards to nursing staff, obviously, I think the biggest challenge we faced was the anxiety and the psychological effects of this, because obviously people are scared of becoming infected, and the nurses were anxious about nursing patients. And so it was just a matter of working with your staff and explaining to them that we're taking our precautions. We are not going to expose you unnecessarily, to sick patients. And so from that aspect, we sort of gained more confidence with the nursing staff, and they realized that we are working together and we're not going to intentionally put them at risk. It's obvious that nurses spend the most amount of time with these patients who are in our ward for over a month. And so, I think that anxiety sort of fizzled off after, it took a few months, but that fizzled off after a while.
Thank you, Dr. Parasnath. I'm sure everyone on our panel finds your work so fascinating, and we'd love to hear about it, but we are pressed for time. So thank you for your contribution. And if I could encourage people to look at the chat to pose questions, and our panelists will respond to you. Next, I am among many angels this evening, and I'd like to have the privilege of introducing Dr. Julia Ambler. Dr. Ambler is the Deputy Director and Head of Clinical Services at Mduduzi Hospice Care for Children. Welcome, Dr. Ambler, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us this evening.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. It's been a rough year for absolutely everyone, as you all know, and I think sort of getting together in a group like this can bring a lot of hope and good kinship. So I thought what I might start with is explaining what is palliative care and why we're part of an oncology webinar. But palliative care is really an extra layer of support for patients that are facing serious illness. And that can be any serious illness, not only oncology, but tonight we're going to focus on oncology in particular. So what do we mean by that? Well, really, we look at the physical symptoms of disease, such as nausea, vomiting, pain that might be associated with a cancer, any other symptoms that come along, like some of our patients get very itchy on certain treatments, or they just generally feel uncomfortable. So part of palliative medicine is focusing on the stuff that interferes with quality of life for our patients. So we work alongside the primary treating team, and really kind of, instead of focusing on the cancer itself, we look at all the other stuff. So obviously the one aspect is the physical things, but it goes much more beyond that. We also look at the emotional states. At Umduduzi, we only work with children 0 to 18, but we do see the occasional adults. But we look at the emotional states of the child and the parents and how they're coping with their illness. And obviously this year has been incredibly taxing. And Tracy will chat a little bit more later about those challenges. We also look at the spiritual care. Many patients, those of you who are currently patients living with your cancer, dealing with it day to day, know that you probably trust your God more than you trust us as healthcare professionals. And part of that is, part of palliative care is understanding what that means to you and working with you and your God or your religion or whatever your spiritual beliefs are to help you stay in a state of health and emotional well-being during what is a very incredibly difficult time of treatment. A lot of people confuse palliative care with end-of-life care, and they sort of say, no, we don't want palliative care yet, it's too soon. You know, the patient's doing really well on his chemo, he's going to get better. And really that is quite short-sighted, because what we're offering is a package of care that looks at the whole patient and not just at the cancer treatment. Now, we know that the hematologists and oncologists at all our departments are super busy. Even in the private sector, they are so pushed for time. So what we are able to offer is a little bit of extra time and support where the family are needing it. Some of the challenges we faced, obviously, as Charlene was referring to, is we've had to kind of not see the patients that didn't absolutely need to be seen. And then we've been doing a lot of work through WhatsApp, which is great. And most of our patients, even the poorest of the poor, seem to have a cell phone these days with at least text messaging available. So they've had some kind of link with the system, with services. Unfortunately, what has happened is that some families, because of the poor social circumstances, the family are now not working, they can't even afford to buy airtime. So that has been a huge difficulty, because very often we'll advise a parent over WhatsApp or through text message on how to manage their child's pain or vomiting at home. So a lot of the physical things that children have had to go through that are on their cancer journey at home have been really difficult if their parent hasn't been able to reach out to the palliative care team and ask for that help. So that's been a massive challenge, is trying to buy airtime for patients here and there to make sure that people are still staying connected. The other thing that goes along with not coming to hospital very often is then access to medication. And if you're needing strong pain medication like morphine, that is a monthly script. You cannot get a 6-month script for that. You have to get a new prescription every month, which does limit the access. So many patients of ours have just not been able to access their good pain control during their cancer journey. One of the other big things around the spiritual aspects of care for our patients is that they haven't been able to go to church. They haven't been able to go to mosque. They haven't gone to any of their normal groups or places of support and care that they would normally have been able to access. And we have seen a profound impact on the emotional side of how people are coping when they've been isolated from what it gives them, their strength and their sense of community and their ability to cope. That has had a huge impact on patients. And I'm sure those of you who are patients on this webinar will agree that that sense of isolation has created, and that distance from your usual sources of spiritual care have really had an impact on the patients. We've also had some patients who have had a severe diagnosis and then been trying to decide, should they go for chemotherapy or radiotherapy and take their chances that it might or might not work. So I'm not talking about the cancers that have a definite high rate of cure, but perhaps one where there is an uncertainty about what is the right thing to do. And families, I feel, have been pushed into situations where they've made a choice to rather choose a palliative approach, which means not going for any kind of interventional treatment and rather being at home, because the last thing they want to do is be separated from their child during a serious illness. And it's really forced people to make decisions that they might not otherwise have made. And that has been hard to watch. And if if your child with a bone cancer has got, even a small chance that radiotherapy will help, or at least buy some more time for them, you can see that, if you're worried that you're running out of time with your sick child that's on a cancer journey, you might really not want to be separated from your child. And with the very, very draconian COVID rules, which we've had to have in place, as Charlene was saying, we've absolutely had to ensure the safety of our patients and of our staff. But people have made decisions, very, very big decisions, that might have cost them time with their precious loved one in the long run, but in the short term, ensure that they would have time during this COVID pandemic. I think from my side, that's probably the main challenges we've seen facing our oncology patients. As I said, Tracy's going to talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of palliative care. And I believe there'll be some more questions later. Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ambler. That was very informative and very significant and important work. Our next, I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, somebody I have come to know as a child of mine, Kulani Shlongwane, who is a survivor and also works with KZN, heads up KZN donor recruitment and education support. He's a specialist in that field and he knows everything. And he operates at the Sunflower Fund. So if you've ever had any experience with cancer, you would know Kulani. Kulani, welcome and thank you for making the time.
Good afternoon, Dr. Sidat, and good afternoon to everybody who's present at this webinar. I'd just like to take the opportunity to really just support what the previous speakers have mentioned. The challenges that are facing our oncology patients at this particular moment in time are bad, and we're probably going to see worse. But just to take everybody else on a brief background on what the Sunflower Fund is and who we are and the work that we do, in order for everybody to have a brief overview. The Sunflower Fund is a non-profit organization, and we've been around for 20 years this year. We have a national footprint, which means we've got offices in KZN, Gauteng, and the Western Cape. This year, on our birthday month, we had the opportunity to partner with DKMS, and DKMS is the largest registry in the world. And this provides us the ability to have a global footprint. And this means that with the global footprint in our presence, we then have access to more than 10 million donors. But whilst we say this, we've got to alarm everybody else that whilst we have access to 10 million donors internationally, it still is within our expectations that we grow a formidable, strong, ethnic, diverse registry in South Africa in order to be able to provide our South African patients with better services and better health cure. And why is that we need particular people to become donors? It's because every 20 seconds, a diagnosis is made globally with regards to blood diseases. And chances to find a donor resides in a patient's own ethnic group. And this means that when one speaks of the work that Dr. Charlene Parsnath does, which is a blood stem cell transplant, it means that the patient will only find a match of their donor in their own ethnic group, which then comes back to us where we really, really need to see a diverse recruitment of donors onto the registry. And if you look at our graph sheet that we've got, if you look at the month of August, June, July, and August, with the amount of donors that we've recruited, the white line will show you the number of white donors that we've recruited. In the month of June, we had 69 donors. In the month of July, we have 114 donors. In the month of August, we had 123 donors. And if you look at the yellow line, which is our colored ethnic group, we've only had 8 in June, 17 in July, and 12 in August. If you look at the orange barcode, which gives us the Indian race, in June we have 7, in July we have 13, and in August we have 8. And if you look at the blue bar graph, it shows you African race. And in the month of June, we only had 3. In the month of July, we've had 7. In the month of August, we've had 9. If you look at the number of patients that are being diagnosed with blood diseases at the moment, and you compare to the number of donors that we are recruiting, we are nowhere close to being able to provide the best care that we would love for our patients, in making sure that when we get them to transplant, that they find a donor that will be able to give them a second chance of life. The faces of blood cancers and disorders, and these are a few patients that we are currently working with in trying to help them to get to transplant. And these patients will need to get a blood stem cell transplant. One of them is Meloguhle, who's diagnosed with bioptic leukemia at the age of 6, Zaid with sickle cell at the age of 8, Lutando at the age of 6, diagnosed with aplastic anemia, lymphoblastic leukemia. So it shows you, this is not even the full list of patients that we are working with that require to have a blood stem cell transplant. And without the help of donors, we are not going to be able to give these children a second chance of life, which is why we make it a plea that we would like people to become blood stem cell donors, and we highlight the importance of people becoming blood stem cell donors. This is Daniella, a 26-year-old lady who's diagnosed with lymphoblastic leukemia. She's been given 8 months to live unless she finds a donor. She's the only child, which means she doesn't have any sibling matches. And that then takes us to saying that her donor will be an unrelated donor. And we just need to highlight to everybody that the chances of siblings being a match sits at 25%, which means the other 75% chance of finding a donor will lie in an unrelated match. So people will ask, what is the criteria of anybody becoming a blood stem cell donor? It's simple. One needs to be between the ages of 18 and 55. You need to weigh over 50 kgs with a BMI less than 40. You need to be willing to help any patient. And the reason why we say that is because as I've indicated, that 75% chances of people finding a donor will lie on an unrelated match. We cannot have people joining the Sunflower Fund registry only to help patients that they are familiar with or that they know, because as you join the registry, you could possibly be a match for another patient, which is why we encourage people who join the registry to join the registry with the will to help any patient that is in need. You need to lead a healthy lifestyle. And if you tick the top boxes, please join the Sunflower Fund and make sure that we join hands in making sure that we grow a formidable registry in South Africa that is able to help and we facilitate the assistance of patients that are suffering from blood diseases. How does one become a donor? We've got, and if you look with COVID-19 stopping us from going out and actively recruiting blood stem cell donors, which is something we've done at the varsity with the introduction of Shakila there, we've now turned to doing an online registration process where people go onto our website and they register on www.sunflowerfund.org. And through the registration, you complete the registration form. Once the registration form is completed, it is then assessed by our medical team. We then send you the swab kit. And we've made the process so much easier so that the donors does not need to go anywhere. We deliver the swab kit via a courier service at the donor's house. The only thing the donor needs to do is they check the form that comes with the swab kit that is correct. They sign it. They do a mouth cheek swab, which they swab the inside of their mouth. And that swab is then couriered back to us, and it's sent through to the lab for testing. And voila, you've now become a blood stem cell donor, which then means that you are able to help or assist us in fighting blood diseases, and you are a lifesaver in waiting.
Have you ever thought about saving someone's life? What type of courageous act would it take to do something so special? Every 35 seconds, someone somewhere in the world is diagnosed with a blood disease, such as leukemia, lymphoma, aplastic anemia, or sickle cell disease, and a blood stem cell transplant is often the only option that could potentially save their lives. Blood diseases prevent the blood from doing its job, such as transporting oxygen to the body's organs and tissues. It also attacks the immune system and makes the body unable to fight infections. When something is wrong with a person's blood, it can affect their total health. The Sunflower Fund recruits stem cell donors from all ethnic groups across the country to help patients find their matching donor in order to get a life-saving stem cell transplant. Finding the correct donor match depends on DNA tissue types, which are inherited characteristics usually shared between people of the same heritage or genetic background. However, with thousands of different tissue combinations, finding a matching donor is not easy. Individuals between the ages of 18 and 55 can register as donors. If you have a consistent body weight of more than 50 kilograms and a BMI of less than 40, you could be eligible to become a donor. The Sunflower Fund will complete a basic health assessment with you, and a DNA sample will then be collected by means of a cheek swab. That's it. It takes less than 10 minutes to register, and the process is non-invasive. Your details will go on a database of potential donors until you are a match for a patient. So what happens when you are a match? You might never be called upon, but when you are a match, that is when you have the opportunity to give someone a second chance at life. Donating stem cells is done by means of a process called peripheral blood stem cell collection. Blood stem cells are collected from the donor by removing blood from the one arm, running it through a machine to separate the stem cells from the blood. Blood is returned to the donor via the other arm. This is a non-surgical procedure and could take between 4 to 6 hours. The procedure is done in hospital to ensure the stem cells are harvested in a sterile environment. Most donors return to their regular activities pretty much immediately, with little to no recovery time. There is no cost, no operations, and no incisions. Our vision is to find every patient their matching donor. Help us fight blood diseases and save lives. Register as a blood stem cell donor today. Visit sunflowerfund.org.
I think what is very important to highlight is that we currently sitting at amount of donors that we've recruited in South Africa at about 77,000. Our population is sitting at 56.6 million. And if we are to look at the statistics that for every patient to find a blood stem cell donor match, it's 1 in 100,000. It means that in South Africa, we haven't even been able to recruit our first 100,000 to actively participate in making sure that we save a patient's life, which is one of the things that we take so seriously at the Sunflower Fund to say, we really would like to grow a formidable registry. We really need to make sure that we convert the people who listen to us into becoming donors, because again, if we look at the number of patients that are being diagnosed with blood diseases and you look at the number of donors that we have on the registry, we really do need to start taking action. We really do need to start having the public really focus more on wanting to become donors so that we can be able to help. And I think we'll pay another video now with a plea from a family just so that we have an understanding of how serious it is and why we really need to get people to become blood stem cell donors.
Mina ngumama ka-Azile, ubusiswa wakangubane isibongo. U-Azile ube umntwana obejabule before aqale ukugula, ubekade umntwana ohappy, ojabule, othanda ukuya esikoleni. Then uthe eqala ukugula sanganothisa ukuthi ugula hlobo luni, besinokuthi uma edlala maybe uyashayeka kumathambo akhe, but ngokuhamba kwesikhathi sabona lose weight, sabona ukuthi asimhambise kudokotela. Unfortunately asimhambisanga kwi-pediatrician, samhambisa kwi-GP just to confirm ukuthi kahle kahle what's the problem. Kodwa ke sathola ukuthi udokotela wangakwazi ukubona ukuthi kahle kahle inkinga ikephi. Then kwahamba isikhathi sabona ukuthi inkinga iyaqhubeka, uyakhala ngama-joints, amathambo, uyakhala ebusuku akalali, unenhlungu ezingapheli nje emzimbeni wakhe. Kwathi July 2019, then we start ukuthola ukuthi umntwana uyadiagnosed with lymphoblastic leukemia, i-cancer yegazi leyo, and waqala lapho ukuba relieved. Nami ngaqala lapho ukuba relieved njengomama to know ukuthi umntwana une-cancer, because akubuhlungu ungazi ukuthi umntwana kahle kahle unani, kodwa ekubeni egula ubona futhi ukuthi ugulela ukufa, kodwa kuyibona ukuthi awazi ukuthi uzothi unani. Ngaba relieved ngaleyo ndlela ukuthi ngithola ukuthi umntwana unani.
And that's Azile, who's only 6 years old, diagnosed with lymphoblastic leukemia. And I think I really want just to end on this note is that we've got to understand that blood cancers, blood diseases are no longer what African people will view as a white disease or diseases that are found in other cultures. We need to now start pulling our weight as African people and as Indian people and as colored people to have donors who join the registry, because in every little diagnosis that is being made, we are needing to find a blood stem cell donor to help that particular patient. And we really need to start saying to people that this is one of the many ways that we can help them. And here's a QR code for anybody who might be interested in becoming a blood stem cell donor. Just scan the QR code. It will take you directly onto our website and you'll be able to register as a blood stem cell donor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kulani, for that very informative presentation. I think as human beings, I mean, just watching Azile on that video and his plea from his parents, pick up the phone, ladies and gentlemen, 0800 12 10 82. Let's try and change the life of this little boy. So our next panelist is Miss Tracy Brand, and I mean, they just keep getting better and better. So she is one of the co-founders of Umduduzi Hospice Care for Children. She's also, in her spare time, she's an honorary academic and lecturer in the Department of Pediatrics at UKZN Medical School. So Tracy, welcome, and thank you for making the time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, and very good afternoon to everybody. Really appreciate this opportunity. As Julia has said, we're part of a palliative care team that works in the state hospitals, primarily in KZN. And during this time of COVID, it's been quite a different challenge for us in terms of what we've been able to provide to our patients. And I think one of the biggest surprises at the start of the hard lockdown was the change of role that we as a palliative care team had to undertake. We're normally very used to counseling families, assisting with symptom control, pain management, dealing with an impending death. But at the time of hard lockdown, the reality of people's lives really became even more of a reality. And we ended up being food suppliers and airtime suppliers to families. Having permits to travel during hard lockdown ensured that we were able to to meet families in the greater Durban area, to provide them with very necessary food so that their children could continue with their treatment. And for those that we weren't able to reach ourselves, we started undertaking sending food vouchers so that the families could go and shop at ShopRite or at Checkers. And even families who previously have never needed that kind of support from us were, towards the end of hard lockdown, phoning and saying, look, we absolutely desperate, we don't have anything left on our shelves. Families where both parents were working, but because of their kind of job, they weren't working, and they weren't getting paid because they weren't working, and literally their cupboards were bare. So that was a really interesting and new challenge for us. And we took our permits and we traveled probably further than we should have, but we did it. And at least we were then able to ensure that those families were able to look after each other, provide food for the child, and ensure that the child was able to take their treatment. I think one of the other things that came across quite rapidly in the start of COVID, and even now as we've gone to level 1, and Julia touched on it earlier, was the fear of, do I come to hospital? I'm due to come to hospital. My child's due for chemo, but I'm afraid to travel. I'm afraid to bring my child to the hospital because of everything that they've read and everything that they've heard. And so parents were making really difficult decisions about delaying treatment. And the implications for that, for everybody on the panel will know, missing a treatment could mean the difference between remission or not. And I think at that stage, families, our phones were going wild because they didn't know what to do, and they didn't know how to make a decision. And we just became a sounding board and saying, well, look, yes, this is what's happening, but these are the steps that, for example, Albert Lutuli has put in place, which Charlene had mentioned earlier. And we can guarantee when you're here, you'll be okay, but it's just getting here that we can't guarantee, that your risk of infection is not going to happen. Then with that also came the whole thing of isolation. So children needing to be admitted because they were needing to come in for 3 or 4 days of treatment. And parents having to make a decision of, do they stay with that child for the amount of time that the child was in hospital because they weren't allowed to go in and out like they would have previously? Or do they leave this child alone and go home to their other children, knowing that the only time that they will see the child in hospital again is when they're discharged? And I think to have to make that decision as a parent must be absolutely awful and soul destroying. And we had to hold a lot of hands through that time and help people make decisions that no parent should have had to make. And then coming into the hospital, both getting swabbed for COVID, and then mom tests positive, but child doesn't. So child goes to the ward, mom's got to go home. So the decision's taken away from the parent as well as to whether they're allowed to stay there or not. And I think one of the things I'm probably most concerned about as a result of this time is the long-term psychological effect that is going to happen with these children around issues of abandonment as years progress. You can't explain to a 2-year-old about a worldwide pandemic which is prohibiting its loved one from visiting. And I think we are noticed, and also as nurses and as staff, we haven't been allowed to do what we'd normally do, and just a child's crying, pick the child up and walk around the ward, because we haven't been allowed to touch unless it's a medical procedure. And I think that is something that we are really worried about, and probably already seeing some behavioral changes in some children. And I think that long-term psychological effect of being alone in hospital, feeling abandoned, even though they haven't been. And I'm just worried about what that's going to mean for our children going forward. And trying to explain to parents, you can't visit. You're not allowed to visit. And trying to explain that the reason is for your safety and your child's safety and everybody else's child and the ward's safety. And it's been really difficult to navigate that. I mean, we have a child, and I am going to go off the oncology thing for about 5 seconds. But we have a child who is in ICU, who is awake, he's verbal, but he's paralyzed. And he hasn't seen his family for about 3 months. And his family are not allowed to visit because of the restrictions of COVID. And so as much as possible, the nurses and ourselves are trying to do video calls with the family. But he's 8. He knows he's missing them. He knows they're not there. He wants to talk to them all the time. And we're now in the process of trying to develop a visitation policy to ensure that these people can see each other. And I think for somebody like him, who is very cognitively aware, I think some of that trauma about not being seen and not being able to see your family is really going to be seen in the years to come. So just in closing, as a palliative care team, I think we've still been able to do what we've always done because we had the permits, and we were able to still see our patients and still provide some support and care to them. But our knowledge had to extend quite extensively as how do we provide the things outside of our service which our patients need, and we are the only people at that time who could assist them with it.
Thank you very much. I think you raised some very important issues, and I see the messages are flooding in. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Ms. Angie Govender, remarkable person, a social worker at Childhood Cancer Foundation in South Africa. And and then we'll take some questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. It's Aggie, and I'm the regional manager of UKZN, just so the panel is aware. And I'm a social worker by profession, something that I love and I really appreciate at this time in the world, because it's the one profession we are slowly working behind the scenes to ensure that what's on top is actually functional. And I think more than any time we've experienced the teamwork. I want to show you, I just want to say there's a pre-COVID and there's a COVID and there's going to be a post-COVID.
It's wonderful that medical technology allows the Sunflower Fund to have people recruited and tested at no cost to them. People are finding the session very important, and the fact that the lines of communication are open. The real challenge that we have around cancer in our country is the secrecy around it, and for some reason the shame some people experience. Kalani touched on it in terms of how it presents in different communities across our country. So, our esteemed panelists have also spoken about the impact of mental health. So mental health and communication and opening up the conversation all form part of a very important role. Personally, myself as a breast cancer survivor, and among other colleagues on the panel, talking about it can be very therapeutic and helps you change your view on your position.
I think my colleagues have covered basically what's happening in the hospitals and what's happening in the with us as NGOs. I just want to quickly say that CHOC is an NGO that's provided services for 40 years. And in that 40 years, we've ensured that we've targeted all communities. Every child that has cancer that ends up at Nkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital or at Gray's Hospital, you know, they've come under our banner in one way or another. And our mission is to provide support for children and teens with cancer. And just some statistics, just, you know, just for whoever's watching and for the panel, we say that 80% of children with cancer will survive in developed countries, and 20% of children with cancer will survive in emerging economies. And something that's come up that we say with additional investment in childhood cancer, new estimates reveal that over 11 million children aged 14 years and younger are expected to die from cancer over the next 30 years worldwide. And just for South Africa, in South Africa, we should be diagnosing between 800 and 1,000 children a year, but we are finding less than half of these children may that we are diagnosing. And when they do come in, they're coming in at a very late stage. So as an organization, we were formed as a response to the loneliness that parents experience when their child is diagnosed with cancer. And as a result, we have CHOC houses throughout the country, with CHOC being a parent support group. So pre-COVID, you know, I mean, we've had the core programs, which is still part of CHOC. We had the Child Teen Parent Support Program. And in this program, we provide transport costs, we provide groceries to ensure that children eat when they're on treatment, and their families also have a meal, and that they can come back and forth to the hospital, you know, without having that worry of transport. We have a psychosocial program, and we proud to say that we have social workers in every hospital in the country supporting children with cancer from diagnosis until end of life or remission. We have an accommodation program where we provide free accommodation for as long as a child is in treatment. And this can be, we've had a family that stayed for 11 months at no cost to them. And this is a program as well that's countrywide. And our advocacy and awareness, which is the cornerstone of our program, because if you don't create awareness, we find that we actually missing out on a lot of children. Pre-lockdown, you know, we had all these programs, and then lockdown. Children, teen parent support stopped, with the exception of the transport costs and I'll just talk about it a little now, and the groceries, of course. The psychosocial program, the social worker is still in the ward, in her scrubs and working with the team, and she has now included our volunteer program into her work. The accommodation initially was closed for 3 weeks just to ensure that the staff were not infected, and we had to, of course, clean out the lodge. And then obviously advocacy and awareness completely stopped. The challenges faced with the hospitals is that, and again, my colleagues have mentioned it, and I'll try not to repeat, it was a very fearful period for the hospital staff, something new, something that they've never experienced before. The hospital stopped all persons who were not directly involved in the hospital from entering the hospital, and included parents and visitors. And when a parent left their child, there was no replacement caregiver, and the child had no access to their parent. Temporary stoppage of outpatient services because the hospital was identified as a COVID center, stroke flu clinic. New cases could not reach the hospital due to some base hospitals closing for decontamination. Children with malignancies could not come through for follow-ups due to the base hospitals closing, and there was no hospital-to-hospital transport. And transplants had to stop with teens because of access, because of so many things that involve transplant. And of course, we had the absolute concern with the no chemo drugs or very little chemo drugs. The challenges faced were both emotional and financial. Children defaulted due to parental fear of travel in public transport. When the fear abated, they could travel, then parents had no money to actually travel. Children in the hospitals had no visitors and to adapt to bonding with nursing staff. Children begin to experience a sense of alienation. And as Tracy mentioned, we are going to see potentially what the repercussions of this lockdown has had. Volunteers initiated the decision to stop going to hospitals. Those are our CHOC volunteers. And this was followed by a hospital policy, which eventually was very, very positive. Social work began to play with kiddies, part of a play program. And obviously it's not play, it's therapeutic intervention. And unsurprisingly, this increased the trust between the children and the social worker. And if you deal with children with cancer, you know of all the invasive procedures that they had to go through, they have to go through. So our social worker has become a conduit now. There was grave concerns that children with cancer will succumb to COVID. But that fear has not been realized. There were 6 children from my latest statistics that had COVID, and 2 passed away primarily from cancer-related issues. This challenges faced by NGOs and especially CHOC. Of course, we lost 95% of our income. We had to close our accommodation. That meant parents had no place to stay. They stayed in the hospital, but of course the environment was fearful. We had to spend money, a lot of money on disinfectants, PPEs, foggers, etc. We had to decontaminate our lodge 4 times. And of course, we had decrease in staff in terms of making decisions about staffing. However, I must say, as much as these challenges of COVID, we've had to rethink so many things. And in my opinion, we have come up with new ways to work with children with cancer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aggie. That was a wonderful presentation. Before we go on to some questions, Q&A with our panelists, I'm going to talk about breast cancer. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. My name is Mariam Sidat, and I'm a breast cancer survivor. And there are about 1.4 million new cases and about 500,000 deaths from breast cancer every year. Okay, so it's the most common form of cancer in women worldwide, in developed and developing countries. We've seen a steady rise or a steady increase in the last couple of years. Scientists have attributed it to urbanization, Western lifestyles. But the biggest challenge that we experience is awareness around breast cancer. I have to say, I'm quite pedantic, and I have never missed a mammogram since the age of 35. And my cancer was diagnosed on a fairly routine mammogram. And you will hear the very same story from a lot of women who are being diagnosed. So there's not enough knowledge about the causes of cancer. So early detection can save lives. If in developing countries, low-income countries, we have a very high fatality rate with cancer because of the late detection. When women and men are diagnosed with breast cancer, it's often too late, and the cancer has advanced. So, health ministries, international organizations like the World Health Organization have programs and lobbying and advocacy programs in place and services. However, we are just not doing enough to save lives. So what we're going to do is encourage you all to get tested to become a donor. That's 0800 12 10 82. Azile is counting on all of us to make our donations, and so are his parents. We also want to encourage you to make very generous donations if you're in a position to do that. And advocate for those that can't do, and reach out and help people. So what I would like to do at this stage, I've summarized a series of questions. Kalani, there's a question from one of our respondents. How do you tell a family that you're at the stage and there is no donor, and how does that impact the family, and how does that impact you as a survivor and as a advocate for early detection?
Thank you, Dr. Sidat, and thank you to the person who asked the question. I think just to put it in very simple terms, if I was to relapse, I would require to have a blood stem cell transplant. And to look at the numbers on the registry currently, and to see the slow growth in terms of numbers makes me worry a lot, and when it has to come to family members, when we have to, try and tell them that we haven't yet found a donor, it is one of the most hurtful things to do, because at any given stage, that family, that patient puts all their hopes in our hands for us to be able to go out there and be able to find a donor, which is why for me, it's a passionate call. It's a call that's very close to my heart. It's a call that I really would love to echo out to everybody to say, if you feel that you cannot become a donor for various reasons, I'm sure that there's a family member who could be able to become a donor. And let us all just rally together. Let us all just grow the numbers. Let us all just make sure that when patients get diagnosed with blood diseases, looking or searching or finding a donor takes nothing more than a couple of hours because of the number of donors that we've grown on the registry.
Thank you, Kulani. I think my next question is for Dr. Parasnath. I think, can you take us through the process of becoming a donor? I think it's important for us to dispel the myth of the processes that patients undergo, because and you're the expert, Dr. Parasnath, so I'll leave it to you.
With regards to the sibling donors, which we do in our unit, it is basically the first test would be, that is done is something called HLA typing. So you take a sample from the donor and you check whether the HLA is identical to the sibling, to the patient. Once we establish that there is a match, then we go through a whole lot of other processes. We have to assess whether the donor has any comorbidities, and in our setting, HIV, for example, hepatitis. So we screen for a whole lot of viruses. Once that is established, and we also need to check the blood groups, whether the blood groups are compatible. And then we would proceed then to start planning for the transplant. And I think Aggie mentioned as well, we have a huge challenge with regards to acquiring drugs timeously in the state sector. So there's a lot of motivations, etc., needs to go into planning. So once all of that is done, the donor is admitted, and we give them something called growth factor. So that is injected over a 5-day period, and that stimulates the stem cells into the peripheral blood. And then we harvest that, and we use South African National Blood Services to do our harvesting in our unit. At the same time, the recipient then gets chemotherapy plus or minus radiotherapy. And when we are ready for the process, that the stem cells are then infused into the donor. So into the recipient. The donor basically needs to be healthy, free from any viral infection, serious comorbidities, and basically stay in the hospital for about a week or two, just depending where they come from. If the socioeconomic circumstances are poor, we tend to actually admit the donor into the ward at the same time. With regards to unrelated donors, now this is where the challenge lies, as Kulani has pointed out, is that it's a struggle to find donors for our patients. And if you happen to find a patient that's on the registry that's a match, then you also have to go through that process again, where you have to assess for viruses, comorbidities, etc. And then a similar sort of process where the donor then would get the growth factor, and then stem cells are harvested. The procedure itself is not complicated, but there's a lot of testing and preparation that goes into getting a patient to transplant. But once the transplant works, obviously, there's it's a very fulfilling experience for us as doctors. But the sad side to it is that there is also the risk that the patient may relapse or may develop complications from the transplant. But I must say, in our unit, we're fortunate that we've had a really good experience with most of the transplants that we've had. And unfortunately, the state sector doesn't have sufficient money to be, doing a lot of unrelated donor transplants. We don't have the manpower, but I'm hoping in time that, all of this will change.
Thank you very much for that. So would you echo that it is a painless process like Kulani and I advocate?
It's I would say relatively painless, because obviously you're going to have a line inserted. In most cases, a lot of places are able to do it with the peripheral line. However, we tend to use in our unit in order to ensure a good yield is that we do use a dialysis catheter sized catheter to actually insert into the donor. But it can be done with very small lines. There are some side effects that the donor may experience, for example, dropping of the calcium levels. But during that procedure, you are with trained medical personnel who are constantly watching your vitals. If there's anything that may go wrong, for example, medication is given. But, we've done close to going on to our 80th transplant in the unit, and we've never had any sort of major complication to any of our donors.
Okay, thank you. My next question goes out to Dr. Ambler and Brand around palliative care and about the detachment or the removal of physical contact within the medical field, and particularly oncology. How has that changed the face of treatment?
It's been really, really difficult because so it's not only parent contact, but also staff contact with the children. So normally if a parent is not there for whatever reason, the staff are able to still play and stimulate and entertain a little bit. And now it all has to be done behind a mask. And in certain areas, it obviously has to be done with full, what we call PPE, the new buzzword of 2020, but that's a sort of serious looking mask, a hairnet, a full-on gown. Really, the only thing the child can see behind your mask is perhaps your eyes, and you have to work really hard to get a little bit of interaction going with your eyes, and you look a bit strange, and it's really just not ideal, and I think very intimidating and frightening. I think working both ways, though, many staff, I think Charlene pointed out earlier, the nursing staff are just terrified, of having too much physical interaction with a patient, because they also don't want to take it home every day to their family. And certainly some of the doctors we work with have opted not to go home, but have moved into other places, hotels. There's been a lovely initiative where health professionals have been put up in local hotels close to the hospitals so that they don't have to take it potentially home to their families. So I think the physical aspects of COVID have really impacted on the child, on healthcare delivery. The basics are being done, but it's with a lot less love and a lot more anxiety. I don't know if that answers your question, Mariam.
Yeah, Tracy, thank you. Tracy, I'd love to hear from your views on the issue.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues has been that children are so isolated. So even previously, the children that aren't on a drip line, they've been able to play with each other in the ward. And now when they try and go to each other, they're told, get back in your bed, because we're just not sure what the other child's got. Even though they've potentially been swabbed and they're negative, we don't know if it was a false negative, they might be asymptomatic. So children are being very isolated in their beds. And so that natural interaction of children who are free to roam, where they normally have lovely games with each other, has also been stopped. And there's again that sense of how do you explain a global pandemic to children who just want to be children? And as an organization, we run 2 play programs and play and stimulation programs in 2 of the local hospitals. And those had to stop for months. They only recently have reopened. And the effect on those children has been huge, especially at King Dinizulu Hospital, where we run an early childhood development program in the MDR, XDR, TB ward, where children are hospitalized for months without their caregivers anyway. And a shining light was our early childhood development program and our play coordinator being with them and just getting them out their beds and doing something fun. And so from March to September, they were stuck in their beds, no entertainment, no access to parents. And again, I think, already it's traumatic because you're away from your parent because you've got MDR, XDR, TB. And now, even that one bit of light that you had Monday to Friday isn't there either. And so I think that social anxiety, the impact on social development of children, of reaching milestones, of losing milestones, we're going to see, as I said earlier, we're going to see coming into the future as well. Okay, thank you. My next question goes to Aggie. Aggie, your mission has always been to keep hope alive for the families, and your NGO makes a substantial contribution with the little to no subsidies. So you are reliant on donor funding. How have you been forced to be innovative during times of COVID to continue to deliver the mission and the goals of your organization?
Thank you for those kind words. And it's absolutely true that our motto is keeping more than hope alive. And these past few months have really, we had to stretch our limitations, our thinking, and our ability in how we can do things differently. And I can say one thing, Miriam, without the generosity of people. At the end of the day, when COVID hit, the corporates ran. And they ran because they were part of the Solidarity Fund giving. And I don't know what promise they heard in that Solidarity Fund giving, that they put a lot of money into the Solidarity Fund. And we had to rely on the individuals. And I must say, individuals without a shadow of doubt just came to the party and started to support us with groceries and with a little bits of money, but what little they had, they were giving to us. And I think, we still have, we have to pay the rent, we have to ensure, we pay the rent for the chalk houses, and we have to ensure that those houses run. So for 3 weeks, as I said, for the first 3 months, we had lost 95% of our income. But the man on the street, the friends that we knew, the parents of the children who had cancer, colleagues, we started to pay it forward between organizations. And we managed to pull through from March to September. And in the last 3 months, things started to change. We have a lot of virtual events. We now have a lot of virtual events. We used to have actual events. So we lost our funding there as well. And we managed to survive, but in the last 3 months, I can see corporates are starting to again connect with us, starting to remember that we actually exist. And I hope for my colleagues the same things are happening. But yes, that's what's been happening, Miriam.
Thank you very much. I think it's, to sum up before I hand over to the amazing Shamar Sheikh, who's going to chat to us a little bit. She's the head of the donor recruitment and patient service at the Sunflower Fund. I think there's a few things. One is, Kulani, please share Azile's parents' plea on social media so that we can spread it far and wide, so that we can ensure a donor for this amazing young kid and for his parents. But I think we need to commend each and every one of you for the kind of work that you're doing. It's not only physical and mental labor, but it's emotionally taxing. The type of labor that you engage in every day is emotionally taxing. And I don't think any amount of time would be sufficient to speak to the topic. But some of the key areas that were raised today around psychological impact, feelings of abandonment because of the new configuration of the infrastructure, the inequity of the funding and where it went and where it actually should be going. So as academics and as activists and community engagement activists, we have to ensure that these are addressed significantly. This is exacerbated by the poverty, high levels of unemployment. And, you know, our only hope at this stage is to continue promoting and advocating for early detection to ensure that the healthcare of a nation is prioritized. And I would like to now introduce you to, I mean, the Sunflower Fund is doing amazing work. Please visit their website. Shamla Sheikh is going to tell you how you can help and how you can assist. And let's reach out. We all have something that we can offer and we can share, and it doesn't necessarily have to be financial or monetary. So Sharma Sheikh, over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And I think just to summarize some of the work that we do that wasn't covered under the scope of our presentation earlier, you know, part of my role, in addition to donor recruitment, is patient support and patient services. And what that role involves is to look at ways of how we can support our patients in several ways. And support can mean different things to different people. So some families that we deal with are unaware of the diagnosis. They need, you know, that kind of information streamlined for them and told to them in plain language. We help patients from a financial perspective, and that is one of the things that I want to stress today. So I see in the chat box somebody asked about the buffs. Because the Be a Hero buffs and where you can purchase them. You can purchase them at all Pick and Pay stores and on Zando online. It costs 30 Rand, and all of the funds that you purchase from the sale of the tops, it goes towards our patient support fund. So, you know, I always say when a family is, when a patient is diagnosed with cancer, it's not only that person that's involved, it affects a whole family, it affects a whole community. And this is why we do the work that we do, to spread the awareness, to try and raise funds to support our families and to support the patients get to transplant. And that is our primary goal as the Sunflower Fund, to try and get our patients to transplant. We've heard a lot about Azile and her story and from her parents, and she's one of many children that we are trying to help get to transplant at the moment. If you view our Facebook and Instagram pages, you'll see for yourself on a daily basis, or sorry, on a weekly basis, we always share a patient appeal online. And what the patient appeal does is we've got a broad reach that those stories go out to, and we call for donor for more people to register as stem cell donors. So if I look at COVID-19 and how it's affected our work at the Sunflower Fund, whilst we're not able to go out into the field and recruit donors like we used to, we have thrived under COVID-19. And I always say to Kulani and the rest of my team, you know, if we could do something so phenomenal under the constraints of a global pandemic, imagine what our potential is going to be when we re-enter the public space to do donor recruitment. Daniella's story that we've shared, Azile's story, in the last 2 months that we've shared those stories online, we have reached an excess of 2,000 registrations on our registry. It is phenomenal. We have not had this even when we did offline drives. So what I would like to leave you with today is that, it's very important for us to keep these conversations going. It's very important for us to continuously share our experiences, to share these stories, and to share all the work that we do at the Sunflower Fund to boost and amplify the work that we do and call for donors to register with us. So in closing, I just wanted to say very briefly, thank you to everybody on the panel. It's been such an honor and privilege for me to have been part of such a wonderful initiative and to be surrounded by amazing, brilliant medical minds in the medical fraternity. And to the clinicians that have spoken today, the work that you do to support patients get to transplant, it's really phenomenal. I was sharing privately in the chat box that I also have a child that has a blood disorder. And 4 years ago, we were struggling to find a donor for him. And I gave up a career in law to become a donor recruiter full time. And that should tell you how passionate I am about this space and the work that we do. So I'm really pleased to have been part of today's session. And I really want to thank Shakila for putting together a really brilliant program for today. And Kolani, I feel like a proud mother. You've done an excellent job with the presentation today and for really, demystifying a lot of the myths surrounding blood stem cell donation. So thank you, everyone. And thank you for having us on the panel today.
I suppose Shakila got me up here because I'm an academic. So I've been taking furious notes, listening to the input from our various experts. And my assessment is that we as South Africans must intensify our efforts directed at our local and national government to realign programs and services that promote comprehensive cancer control programs and services and care. And this should be part of a national initiative. The advocacy around early detection strategies for impoverished communities, indigent communities, low and middle income countries like ourselves, countries experiencing financial difficulty during these COVID times. Make available screening, education on symptoms. And these processes are costly, and as a result, can only be viable in countries with effective healthcare systems. So in closing, I would like to encourage us all to reach out. So onwards and upwards, and wishing you all continued success and hope we find donors very soon.